Okay, beautiful. Okay, so welcome to the webinar, Neuroinclusion at Work, Creating Neuroaffirming and Inclusive Workspaces Where All Beings Belong. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted to put this webinar out there because I think this is super important, and I'm, really trying to do a lot of work in this space. Um, and please work. Okay, so just a little bit about me. My name is Ariela Koldorf, and I am a neurodiversity consultant. I am also the founder of Spectrum of Light Support Services. I have over 20 years experience in behavior inclusion and workplace transformation. I work with organizations across sectors to build neuro-inclusive, strengths-based environments where all employees can thrive, especially those who think, process, or communicate differently. And my work is rooted in empathy, lived experience, and evidence-informed practice. I've worked in various spaces, including supported living, hospital, and school board and education, and social services. I have various certifications, including cognitive behavior therapy certification, dialectical behavior skills certification. I'm a crisis prevention and intervention facilitator. I have micro credential in psychological safety in the workplace, and I also have a life coaching certification. And a little more about me. So I spent a lot of my career working with professionals in various settings, building their capacity and understanding and supporting neurodivergent folks. And I've also consulted in creating neuroaffirming and neuro-inclusive spaces for clients and professionals. I spent much of my career working in the school board, um, and I spent a lot of that time in different classrooms building capacity, building different programs and strategies and things just to create the classroom more neuro-affirming, not just for the students, but also for the staff. I also identify as neurodivergent. I do manage anxiety, and I am an ADHDer, and I have a neurodivergent child. He's an ADHDer and has a learning disability as well. So I bring firsthand experience as a woman who's had to mask neurodivergence for much of my life and ignore uh, my need for accommodation for much of my life. And I didn't realize that I was neurodivergent, or I knew about the anxiety, but I didn't realize that I was an ADHDer until my son was going through the process of getting assessed. And this comes from all the experience that I have and all the knowledge that I have. I still, didn't kind of put the pieces together until I had that lens as a parent and had to answer those questions and really think about my child. And I had a lot of aha moments as we were going through that. And that was just like, 3 years ago. No, actually more around the time I was 40. So I really began having aha moments and recognized a lot of my struggles growing up and in my adult life have been because of my ADHD. I always knew I was quirky. I always knew I was a little different than my peers and things like that. But yeah, it's been really interesting. And that's part of the reason that I've also set out to really work with corporations and organizations because um, it's not easy to kind of make yourself fit in, right, into the world and into the workplace when you need some accommodations and some support to be successful. So a little bit about Spectrum of Light Services. Like I said, we partner with organizations to build inclusive and strengths-based environments. Neuroinclusion isn't just like a nice to have thing, it is a strategic advantage. When neurodivergent individuals are supported to thrive, then everyone benefits, right? It benefits the individual, but it also benefits the corporation and their bottom line. And a truly inclusive workplace fosters belonging and leverages diverse thinking styles, builds psychological safety, and the result is lower staff turnover, increased profitability, and because, when everyone's supported, everyone can thrive. So we do have a lot of the agenda today, and we're going to talk about what is neurodivergence and understanding neuroaffirming practices. We're going to talk about masking, why neuroinclusion matters in the workplace, gaps in DEI strategies, and then some principles of a neuro-inclusive workplace that you can take and use right away. But again, this is just the beginning because real transformation takes time, it takes strategy, and it takes support. So if you have any questions at all during my presentation, like I said, feel free to either put your hand up, hopefully I'll see it, or just chime in. We'll also have time for a Q&A at the end, and I'll also let you know how to reach out to me in case you want anything or need anything moving forward. And I'll also I have a QR code at the end for like a one-page kind of takeaway from today. Okay, so let's do this. Let's get started. So what is neurodivergence? Neurodivergence is often referred to as neurodiversity. They kind of, get used hand in hand, and I also use them hand in hand, but they're actually two different things. Neurodiversity is kind of, the idea that everyone's brains are different from each other. So they're neurodiverse, right? But neurodivergence refers to that natural variation in how people think, learn, move, process, and interact. So it's that extra extra bit of difference. And it includes, things like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, anxiety, Tourette's syndrome, and much more. But, it really, we use that term to shift the narrative from like a deficit or disability to just a difference, right? So we all have a difference in our brains. And 50 to 20% of the population is neurodivergent. So instead of asking like, what's wrong with someone, we want to, we want to start asking, um, what supports or structures do they need to thrive? And neurodivergent employees often bring creativity, intense focus, out-of-the-box thinking. Sorry, I'm just going to admit more people. And strong ethical reasoning. And they do that when the environment is right. I am just going to check in really quickly in the meeting to ensure that everybody is in okay and that I don't have anybody waiting. Okay, we are good. Okay, are there any questions so far? Are we good to go? Okay, I don't think I see any hands. And if I missed you, please, like I said, just go ahead and shout me out. Okay, so what is masking? Oops, sorry, one sec. Okay. Let's take a moment to talk about this because so many neurodivergent individuals do this without even realizing. Okay, masking is when someone suppresses or hides their natural behaviors, their communication styles, as they feel they need to fit into the expected norms. And like I said, this is often subconscious, but it is also very conscious as well. Um, you know, we often try to not be that person. We often try to not ask the questions that we're not comfortable asking because, out of fear of reprimand or, just not feeling safe in certain environments to do that. And it's really a survival strategy. 63%, of neurodivergent employees have engaged in masking at work. This is from a study in UK in 2024 by Pierre and Condola. 42% of respondents felt uncomfortable asking for reasonable adjustments or accommodations. 36% felt uncomfortable asking for reasonable adjustments as well. I'm not really sure why. Oh, sorry, 36% felt comfortable and 42% felt uncomfortable. And then 60% reported receiving the necessary adjustment, but that means that 40% did not. Okay, 69% of respondents in that study disclosed their neurodivergence to someone at work. And then 49% disclosed it to their company, 51 did not disclose it to their company, 44% disclosed it to management, 56% did not disclose their neurodivergence to management at all. So again, as you can see, there's a lot of people in the workforce that are neurodivergent that are not disclosing their disability. And again, that comes from a place of not feeling safe and just not wanting to be kind of that black sheep or not wanting to be that person at work. Many folks also don't realize they're neurodiverse or neurodivergent. Some people are unidentified or undiagnosed. And again, sometimes you just don't recognize that, your quirks and all the things that you kind of had to, work around growing up or as an adult is actual neurodivergence. So some examples of masking can be pretending to be comfortable in a place that feels overwhelming. Holding in stims. So, tapping, rocking, fidgeting. I always say, like, I always have fidgets beside me. This is actually my son's, but I use it when I'm like trying to put an email together. It's kind of noisy, so I don't use it during meetings. But I always have fidgets. I also have my dragonfly here that has like, I love it because it has different textures, and I'm always playing with things while I'm talking, or tapping my foot, or tapping my pen. Over preparing for social interactions, which can cause exhaustion or anxiety. This is one that I have done many a time in my life, and it's that kind of anxiety about how is that conversation going to go, or what is going to be like during that team meeting? And am I going to be asked to speak? Am I going to be comfortable speaking? When I'm nervous, and you can tell I'm nervous right now, I kind of stumble on my words and speak really quickly, right? And so it's always that like anxiety and that over preparing so that you go in there rehearsed, but then you also come out of there perseverating about what you said, how you've acted, and how that came off to the crowd. There's also, hiding struggles with executive function. So time management, transitions, organization. Um, you know, that's something that again is not something that's always accepted, right? We as adults, as professionals, are just expected to know how to time manage. We expected to know how to transition from one activity to the other, and it doesn't look the same for everybody. Some people have really good strategies for time management and transitions, and some people are very time blind, especially ADHDers when we hyper focus or when we are really, into a task, that time just flies, or we, underestimate or overestimate how long a task can take us. So there's a lot of things that, people mask and kind of hold back so that they fit in and don't seem like the oddball out. Masking, like I said, can be incredibly taxing. It's linked to higher rates of burnout, mental health challenges, and a reduced sense of self. And it's also linked to higher rates of turnover. And so when we talk about creating neuro-inclusive environments, reducing the need for masking is a huge, huge part of that. We want people to feel safe enough and comfortable enough to show up as they are, not who they think they're expected to be. And that's because when people feel safe enough to show up as they are, and ask for the supports or accommodations that they need, they can actually thrive, and be even better employees. Any questions so far? Just gonna maximize my screen here so I can see. Okay, I don't see any hands up, so I will keep on going. Okay, so let's talk about neuroaffirming and what that means. Because the two terms neuroaffirming and neuroinclusive go hand in hand. So neuroaffirming means that we affirm someone's identity. We don't try to fix them. We don't try to change their way of being. Um, It validates respect to neurodivergent identities and encourages individuals to show up as they are, moves away from, again, trying to fix or normalize, and it really focuses on strength and autonomy and dignity. Whereas neuro-inclusive, it really focuses on the environment and the system. So it shifts systems, it shifts environments and expectations, not people. Embeds flexibility, accessibility, psychological safety to the workplace, and it includes, neurodiversity in DEI policies, which doesn't often happen. It also includes neurodiversity in leadership and in culture. And then in turn, it helps reduce masking and it increases engagement and supports retention. So again, it's all about, not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, but it's trying to take that round hole and creating it into a square so the peg can fit in, right? If that makes sense, to use that analogy. But it's just about, really letting the person know you're amazing as you are, like you are here for a reason, you have talent, you have skill, but let's give you what you need to be successful within our organization. Some examples of neuro-inclusive practices are breaks, flexible schedules, varied workspaces. So again, like sitting desk, standing desk. Some places are hybrid. Some places of work where you can work at home, work at the office. Noise reducing supports. So many people, I know that, for me, if I don't put in my AirPods, if I'm working, outside of my own office, I can't focus. And also varied communication strategies. Communication, whether it's expressive or communication that we receive, we really need to be very mindful of how we communicate and how we expect communication back. And there are so many things that we can do and put in place to ensure that communication strategies are varied enough for individuals so that they can be successful as well. And we'll get into that in a little bit as well. Yes, absolutely. So Kelly's asking if I can repeat the analogy of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. So you've all heard, or maybe you heard the analogy of, you can't fit a square peg into a round hole, right? Because like it literally will not fit in square into a circle. However, if we take that round hole and create it into a square that the peg can fit into, right? So we have to make some adjustments. We have to reconfigure the environment, but then the square can then fit into it once it's the right, no problem, once it's the right environment. So again, that's what it's really all about, right? So it's all about we have these systems in place and we have organizations in place, and you can work at a really incredible organization that is very people forward and supports their staff and are doing all the right things, but then you still have neurodivergent staff who perhaps aren't quite able to be successful within that environment. And there are often simple universal things that we can do within our organization to support those folks. But the beautiful thing is that when we put things in place to support neurodivergent folks, it actually benefits everybody, right? So, when I'm talking about all these accommodations and strategies, I'm not saying, create them for specific people. The work I do with organizations is to really make them a universal design within the organization so that everybody benefits. And in turn, you're still supporting all of your staff, right? So we just want to make sure that all the staff that you have, all your team members are able to reach their full potential because they are getting the support they need, and they're also working within an environment that is conducive to them. Okay, any other questions so far? All right, we'll keep going. So let's talk about why both matter. Okay, together, the neuro-inclusive approach creates safer, more responsive environments, cultures where neurodivergent employees thrive, not just survive, and a foundation for long-term inclusion and innovation. When when we can create a space that is neuroaffirming and neuroinclusive, we're able to create an environment where all employees can thrive, regardless of their needs. And like I said, universal approaches enable all employees to experience more success. And there is a quote here on the bottom of the slide, and it says, 2 of our team members who identify as neurodiverse are amongst the most productive in our facility. One broke record after record. And this is from the book Like a Mother by Julie Cole. And Julie Cole is the co-founder of Mabel's Labels. Yeah, she is actually a mother of 6 with one identified neurodiverse child, and she does, she has through her career at Mabel's Labels and still does hire neurodivergent folks. And she talks a lot in the book about, yeah, sometimes it does take a little bit longer to train these folks, but guess what? Once they're trained, they thrive because they do provide them with the environment to thrive. They do have flexible work schedules and flexible settings, and they really try to put their staff's needs first because they, and she said, like, you reap the benefits as an organization, as a company. So when I read that quote, I wanted to put it in here because I think it really kind of sums up and really, says really well kind of what the goal is. So why does neuroinclusion matter in the workplace? You absolutely 1,000% have neurodivergent folks working within your organization. Whether you know it or not, we are there. They might even not know they're neurodivergent, but absolutely you have people working with you or for you that are neurodivergent. Like I said before, about 50 to 20% of the population is neurodivergent, likely higher, as many may have not disclosed and many may not know they're neurodivergent. And that number is actually, so that is an American stat, but that's very in line, on par with Canadian stats. And the reason I know that is because I have a DI consultant, sorry, that I often collaborate with. And, she found through various surveys that she's conducted within workplaces and across organizations, that again, she literally told me, I think we talked about 3 weeks ago, she said, yeah, I'm finding that 50 to 20% of employees that I survey are identifying as neurodiverse. So that again hits the head on the nail. And that's quite a big chunk. Yeah, so that's that. This 50% to 20%, I'm not sure how recent that is. However, the 50 to 20% that my colleague told me about, that's within the last year. And that was my exact response to her as well, Kelly, is that I'm sure it's much higher. I think now people are feeling a little bit safer. No problem. People are feeling a little bit safer disclosing, especially depending on the sector they work in, right? So I've worked in the social services sector for a very long time. And so for me, I do feel a little bit, more comfortable disclosing. I've always felt comfortable talking about myself and my quirks. And, that's how I raised my son too. Like he's very open about his neurodivergence because there's nothing wrong with it. We are who we are. But again, everyone's got their own neurodiversity. And I think, in more corporate sectors, people don't disclose as often because they don't likely feel safe doing so. And so I do think you're right, Kelly. I think that number is low. However, that is the stat that is out there right now, including the research that I've done over the past, I would say 2 to 3 weeks. That stat is still pretty consistent. Exclusion of neuroinclusive policy leads to higher turnover, burnout, and misinnovation, like I said before. And that's again because people are just getting, like they're just burning out from masking and just from being in an environment and being in a job and a career that has such expectations of them that they can't meet. Not because they don't have the skill, not because they don't have the ability, the conditions aren't right. And that is not just like the work expectations, but again, that comes from communication systems, right? How is communication put out into your system? Is it just email? And is there an opportunity for staff to be able to have it read to them, right? Like text to speech and speech to text. How do staff have to communicate back? Do they have to sit there and type an email? Perhaps that's really, really difficult for them, right? Perhaps they have a written expression learning disability. And so typing or writing an email is hard, not because they can't do it or don't have the information, but it is just there is a barrier there, right? So we really want to start looking at things like that within organizations to make things more accessible. We want to make a communication more accessible. We want to be able to really be really clear with our communication and our expectations. We want to look at like hiring practices. What is that like? Like, what are retention practices? Are we just having like verbal, verbal interviews? Are we posting things in a way that people will understand and, people will think, oh yeah, I am actually capable of doing that job. Are our postings too general or are they over specific, right? So there's so much that we want to look at. And when you are able to really reach a higher number of people, and when you're able to kind of recruit people in a more neuro-inclusive way, your bottom line is going to go up as well. And like I said, throughout, innovation, creativity, and productivity thrive when neuro-inclusive environments are created. So some gaps in DEI strategy, okay? Reliance on disclosure to trigger accommodations with a low disclosure rate. That's kind of like what we talked about a couple of minutes ago, right? 50 to 20% identify as neurodiverse. That number most likely is higher. And when we rely on disclosure, firstly, that leaves a lot of people, out in the dust without accommodation. But secondly, imagine having to disclose um, imagine having to disclose to get an accommodation and all of a sudden you're that person with the accommodation, right? And I've seen that many times through my career, whether it's like physical accommodation or whatnot, but it's always, there's that stigma. And so for us to wait for people to disclose or rely for people to disclose instead of putting universal strategies out there, I mean, that's really not inclusive of a lot of our staff. policies that unintentionally exclude people with sensory communication needs, sensory or communication needs, right? So we talked about like the masking and the communication, and then a lack of leadership training on inclusive communication and flexibility. I think a lot of leaders intend to do well, and I think a lot of leaders think they know or have taken some basic training, but haven't gone deep enough and haven't actually audited their policies and their structures enough to be able to be truly neuro-inclusive and neuro-affirming. So again, many organizations intend to be inclusive, right? And many DEI initiatives focus on race and gender and sexuality, which is critical and absolutely essential, but they miss that invisible difference. They miss the communication and processing and learning differences. And so that's where neuro-inclusion and neuro-inclusive practices come in. So, again, when that is missed, many of our staff are then masking and burning out and go on leaves or leave the job altogether. Again, neurodiversity, we have to also look at policies that focus on, compliance instead of belonging, right? So what does that say, right? So thou shalt comply, right, with our rules as opposed to like a culture of belonging within the organization. Because when you have that mind shift, when I now, instead of being scared because I have to follow some rules, when I now belong on this team and I know that my full skills and my full potential is um, what my supervisor, my management, my leadership values in me, then I'm now feeling a lot safer in asking for accommodation. And that's where that psychological safety comes in. I'll talk about that again in a second. And then one size fits all approaches, again, miss individual needs and strengths. So this is what organizations often have within their policies. As much as we try to be inclusive and we have DEI strategies, it is a one size fits all. So the trick is, how do we go from one size fits all to a universal policy and strategy that will be accommodating to so many different needs and brains? And so, I'm hoping that through all this information, you can see that neuro-inclusion is not a bonus, right? It's imperative. Inclusive systems benefit everyone, not just the neurodivergent team members. It benefits, neurotypical, so to speak, team members, as well as the organization itself, productivity, revenues, all that stuff. So where do you begin? I know that I've kind of run through this really quickly, but I did want to, some time for a discussion, a question and answer. But really, foundations of a neuro-inclusive workplace. What you want to ask yourself, what are you doing right now? Okay, to start like making your workplace more inclusive. What can you do? So you can look at, if you can do a few small things like review recruitment process, like I said before, right? How is your recruitment process accessible to all? Are you posting in a way that is accessible to all? Are you looking at resumes and applications that perhaps have some different skill in them? Are you looking for specific skill within them? Or are you just like scanning them for education and experience, right? Audit your communication norms. I talked a lot about that, but again, like we want to look at, are we giving people different ways of receiving communication? Are we communicating in language that is clear and concise? I'm not saying dumbing things down by any means, but you want to make sure that when we do communicate with our larger teams, we're doing it effectively. And are we giving our staff and team members different ways of communicating back? So, much of the world relies on email and text, which is great. But there are things that we could do to kind of support that, right? So again, there's like speech to text, text to speech. Any suggestions around auditing our communication norms? Is there a toolkit? So I don't have a toolkit to share today, but again, that's something that we could talk about further. But yeah, there are so many different tools that you can use. So when you do audit your communication um, policies or the way you communicate, you just want to look at what are the different ways that we can support our staff in accessing information and in giving information. Some examples that I like to give about communication and recruitment together, for example, is during an interview. Are we just sitting there around a table or on the screen and you're asking me questions and I have to like, rapid fire them. Because whenever I go into an interview, I always tell people I don't interview well. I get nervous, I blank, and as much as I can think on my feet and I know my stuff, I'm so anxious and nervous that I actually can't think on my feet, right? So, how can we make that process more accessible and more supportive for people's success? Because really, I don't think the point of an interview is to see how well you can answer questions under pressure, unless that's the job, right? I think the point of an interview is to really look for the best person for that job, and that's a combination of skills and a combination of like, the kind of person you are and how you're going to fit into our culture. So things like, um, I've worked with organizations where if we're on a screen or if we're in person, we have a screen. And when the question is asked, it comes onto the screen so the person can see it. The option of having a notepad beside you so that you can write notes, for yourself so that, because sometimes, again, things pop into your head and you have to write those notes to remember them. Making it clear that taking your time to think about an answer is completely okay and completely acceptable, and kind of like taking that pressure piece away. So there's so many things that organizations can do to do that. We also want to build psychological safety. And psychological safety is the idea that people feel safe and comfortable enough having a voice. People feel safe and comfortable enough, no problem, people, approaching whether it's colleagues or supervisors and, speaking about their thoughts. Or if, we're in a team meeting, people feel comfortable enough that if they're not leadership, or, if they are one of the newer people, it is safe and acceptable, and it is actually applauded to, raise your hand and say your piece, right? So when you create that kind of environment where, of course, there's always going to be hierarchy, right? Because we have management leadership, but where it doesn't matter whether you're a leader or, a brand new employee, you have a voice and your voice matters, then that psychological safety gets built up really fast. And what happens when people feel safe and comfortable is they often feel safe and comfortable as well to ask for what they need or use accommodations, right? So it's just building that culture that you are safe here, you're appreciated here, regardless of, your needs and all that stuff. The other piece too about psychological safety is, how do we manage um, disagreements and things like that. So it's just knowing how to have those supportive conversations while still, of course, having, we all have to have our rules and boundaries and expectations in place, but just ensuring that everybody feels safe coming to work and really having a voice. Um, sorry, let me just go down here in my notes. Strengths-based leadership. So again, focus on what people can do. A lot of leaders do come from a strength-based perspective. And a lot of leadership teams that I've worked with are really good at seeing people's strengths, but they actually don't go that extra mile in looking at that neurodiverse piece, right? So it's really understanding, you know, strengths within different profiles of people and how to hone those in and how to encourage your staff to use their skill in a way that will make them successful. And that begins at recruitment, right? Like that begins at looking at those applications and looking at those, excuse me, resumes during that interview and just really knowing how to pick that out and how to help, you know, um, get your staff to really hone in those strengths. Because as soon as we can highlight people's strengths and abilities and we don't just look at what they can't do and what they're not good at, again, that's part of building that psychological safety. And all of a sudden you have a staff who's able to thrive because they don't feel too scared to perform. Okay. And then redefining performance productivity. You know, recognize different working styles and sensory needs, and involve neurodivergent employees in shaping policies. So that's really what that means. It doesn't mean that you have to have different levels of productivity and of expectation, but productivity and performance will look different for everybody. And it really depends on the job that you hire them for. But again, if you have a very clear expectation and you hire somebody that can do the job, there should be no reason why they can't perform and be productive if the environment and the conditions are right. Okay, so again, there are some brilliant, brilliant, brilliant people out there who are neurodivergent, who are and were successful because they were able to really use their strengths in a way that uh, made sense to them. Right. So if you're hiring somebody, they're obviously there for a reason. Now let's try to shape them and help them be successful and give them the accommodations they need to get there. And then invest in neurodiversity training and consultation, right? So, and that I'll talk in my next slide about the things that I do offer, but it is an investment, but it's an investment that will pay off because at the end of the day, neurodiversity training for leadership, but for teams as well, um, is crucial because understanding your team members and then maybe having some aha moments for yourself and recognizing that, oh, like, okay, perhaps I need some accommodation and that's okay. Just makes things run so much smoother. Okay, so any questions there before I move on to my wrap up? Okay, I don't think I see anybody. Um, so again, I offer different things like workplace consultations. And what that means is I go into your organization, kind of, meet with leadership or HR, DEI, and kind of talk about some challenges, barriers that you're seeing or that you're having, and consult in that way. Leadership training, again, leadership training about neurodiversity, neurodivergent neuro-inclusive strategies. I do help with policy and environment audits. So that's where we look at different things like communication and environment and like retention policies and things like that, and how you can make them more neuro-inclusive and neuro-affirming. I do team workshops where whether it's PD or just like a team building thing, where I do work with various teams on, again, always with a neurodiversity, neuro inclusion kind of focus. And then I also do speaking engagements where if it's a larger corporation, perhaps I'll go in and do a 1 hour seminar or however long and talk about whatever area within neurodiversity and neuro divergence that the organization would like me to talk about. So again, this is how you get in touch with me. You will have a one-pager. I'm going to give you a QR code in a second where you will have all of my contact information. It's actually a two-pager, not a one-pager. But again, I have a website, www.spectrumoflight.ca. You can also email me at spectrumoflightservices@gmail.com. And I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram, Spectrum of Light Services. So that is where you can find me. And then before we do questions, I'd love for you all to take a scan of this QR code or, take a picture, a screenshot, whatever you want for now, so that we can get you that one pager, that two pager, and you can have some of the information that we discussed here today. So I will just leave that up while I go back into the Zoom. Okay. Are there any questions at all? Did anybody have or want to talk about anything? Whoops. What is happening? Everyone's so quiet. Okay. Well, um, I will take that as no, but I am here. I'm going to stay here until 2 o'clock. I was anticipating people may want to ask questions or have a bit of a discussion. Oh, hold on. So I'm just going to take this. So Kelly says, no questions, just thank you so much. I'm on the DEI committee at work. So this is great food for thought. Yeah, no problem. It is great food for thought. I have also been on my fair share of DEI committees. And again, this has always been an angle that I've brought and a lens that I brought into the DEI committee because, um, like I said, it isn't usually thought of when you think about DEI, but I know that a lot more organizations now are trying to kind of lean into the neurodivergent, neuroinclusion realm just because, again, it's becoming so much more um, apparent in organizations. Oh, let me just see here. So Melissa, if you suspect someone might be neurodivergent, how do you ask what they might need for support without asking them for any personal or private information? That's a great question. That's a little bit iffy. I think it really depends on your, um, I think it depends on your relationship, but also, that's why I always really talk about universal design, right? Because when there's universal design, we don't have to have that conversation. And it's really an invasion of privacy. You can't really ask somebody, oh, like, you know, are you neurodivergent? Like, did you? So that's where universal design comes in because it gives that permission, right? Because it's normal practice. It's just the way we do things in this organization. So it's not a big deal. It's not a problem. And then Aaron says, no questions either, but thank you so much for the presentation. It was great and helpful. I'm so glad. Um, yeah, I'm really glad that you've found it helpful. I wasn't sure if I was putting enough information in there, but I wanted to give you guys enough that we could do within the hour of time, just so that you can have some takeaways from here. And then Kelly's asking, is giving employees as many options as possible they're inclusive? I like options. So that's a great question too. I like options too. I think it really depends. Like it's hard because you don't want to just get, say, do whatever you want, because you still have to have, you know, kind of order and reason, right? Within an organization, you want to make sure that you are still able to function and you're still able to, run as a team. With that being said, there are specific things, like there are, things that you can do that will kind of blanket a lot of options, if that makes sense. So when you do create that universal design and when you do look at your policies, you can put things in place in a way that will, again, like will make it easier for people to access what they need. Some organizations kind of, make it known that like do what you need to do for you within the structure, right? So I know that going back to Julie Cole, in her book, she says that I forget what it's called. I know it's called the row and I forget what it stands for, but they had an employee that was going on a trip like overseas and was working from there. And they said, okay, let's experiment with this. And productivity for that employee actually went up because, the way that they structured it, just they still had expectations in place. Like when you are working, when you do like working and focus and not with other people, whatever. But like he was really able to do his job and do it effectively. And that's because they were able to create an environment where he got his needs met, but also knew that, they did say like you need to kind of meet your end of the bargain, right? Like we will work with you, but you need to meet your end of the bargain. And then Kate, sorry, I don't know how to say her name, Sitlali. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. I'm interested in assuring our communication channels are always inclusive, and we have a website, LinkedIn profile, newsletter, Instagram, several in-person virtual events. We are 100% volunteer, but I want everyone to feel seen and included. I'll check your resources and get us started. That's amazing. I love to hear that. I love that you have so many different channels for sure. That's amazing. And again, um, it's all about how do we communicate it, right? So if you have in-person events or if you have, I don't know, like if you have an office, do you have technology there that can read things back to the employee? How are your employees expected to communicate, right? So do they have, for example, I know my son does a lot of speech to text. His learning disability is written expression. I've known it since he was very little because even writing his name was an issue. Now that he's 11, um, writing is better for him. But even when he uses his laptop at school, he still does speech to text. He does that to text as well, like when he has to text me or whatever from his phone, because it's faster. And he doesn't get stuck on how to spell words, even though I don't care how he spells words, but he really like that's his perfectionism, right? He's like, no, well, I don't want people to not know what it says, or I don't want to, look dumb in front of my friends or teachers or whatever. So he uses a lot of speech to text because it just makes him feel more confident in his communication. 5, 6 years ago, that would have probably not been as acceptable as it is now, but now like everyone does it. I do it too. And so you want to look at those kinds of pieces of communication as well. And then April said, thanks, Ariela. Appreciate the information and resources. It is not a problem. I am, so glad I think at one point we had 17 people here. So that's wonderful. And I appreciate you all coming. Um, please do not hesitate to reach out at all. I do offer um, complimentary connection calls, even if you just wanted to connect as a follow-up. If you have any questions, I'm always happy to answer them. Again, I wanted to put this out there as a free webinar because I wanted to make sure that people came and just heard this information because I'm very passionate about the work that I'm doing. And so I'm really glad you're all here. If anybody within your organizations has any questions, feel free to connect them with me as well. Yeah, and I appreciate you all. And again, I'll stay here for a couple extra minutes if anybody has any more questions or anything they want to say. So thank you. No problem. Thank you all. Sounds good. Thanks, Natalie. Sitlali. I'm sorry, I don't know how do I pronounce your name? Can you like
You did it perfectly. That's perfect.
Sitlali?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
No problem.